So let's explore a little bit more of this question of judgment, this problem really of judgment. And just to recap very briefly this morning, seeing the bigger picture, particularly in the meditation practice, but fundamentally the huge power of mindfulness, the huge power of a calm awareness, a calm noticing of what's going on in the mind, and just seeing judgment, knowing it's judgment. And over time, that, as I said, can create some space from the judgment, some non-identification with it, and the pattern just kind of wears itself out, potentially. So just the basic teachings of mindfulness and how much power there is in that, how much freedom there is just in mindfulness. But mindfulness is by itself not all powerful, of course. It's one aspect of the path, one very important kind of fundamental aspect of the path. It's a very important tool. That's an indispensable tool. But by itself, it's certainly not the whole path, and it's not capable by itself of completely freeing us. It's just not. It's not. The Buddha taught a path that involves lots of aspects, of which mindfulness is one very central one, but only a part. And so sometimes things like patterns like judgment, etc., do disappear just through the power of mindfulness, but oftentimes they don't. And we can be mindful until the cows come home, and certain things don't seem to change. So we need to sometimes bring in a more active kind of challenging of patterns like judgment. Actively kind of poking at them, I guess, in a way, undermining them in a way. So this is what I want to go into a little bit. First, sort of suggested ways of working, you could call it. So first one is this kind of environment is very interesting. So we've come together for a day and we're in silence together. Now you may know some people here, but others maybe you don't know anything about them. And how quickly, it's interesting to notice how quickly, even in the course of a day, and it's sort of, much, you can see it much more clearly sometimes on a longer retreat, but even in the course of a day of silence, how quickly the mind comes in and we start judging others. We don't know anything about them and we're judging. And sometimes we forget that, in this case, because of the silence, we know very, very little about what's going on in that person's life, what piece of news they may just have heard, what they've just found out about their health or a health condition they're struggling with, what the situation at work is. We know very, very little. And somehow the sort of arrogance of the mind comes in and it just makes these judgments. And so very simple. Sometimes we just need to remind ourselves that we don't know. And even when we're actually talking with people, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. So just reminding, I don't know the whole picture here. And we can judge all kinds of things. Judge the way they dress, the way they walk, the way they eat, the way they talk, the way they don't talk, anything the mind can grab hold of and judge. Just a little bit of a reminder. I don't know the whole picture. I know a minuscule amount. That's the first one. Second one is, in the Buddha's words, it's funny English translation. He says, when there's judgment of oneself or another, remain percipient of the beautiful, remain percipient of the positive qualities. So what that means is when there's judgment, when there's negative judgment of another or oneself, the attention is kind of like a magnet. It's being pulled into that piece of the picture, that piece of that other person that we're judging. And we just keep seeing that, and we just keep seeing that. The attention keeps going there, like sucked into it. And the Buddha's saying, remain perceiving, draw the attention, keep drawing the attention to what is beautiful. Now we can do this in ourselves. Oftentimes we start judging ourselves and we forget everything that's beautiful. Everything, all the kindness and all the lovely intentions we've had, etc. Whatever it is. Same with others. Now, we know this, but it's actually a practice. Find something, reflect something in this person that is noble, that is lovely, that is good, at the very least that's not bad. And just keep bringing the mind there, keep bringing the mind there. This is mind training, heart training. Reflecting on how little we know. Second one, remaining percipient of the positive qualities. The third one, if we find ourselves judging another person, to recognize in that moment that, as I said at the beginning, judging, a mind full of judgment is actually painful. So when there's a current of judgment running, that holding that in the mind is actually painful. It's suffering for oneself. And just to, if one's not sure about it, to really feel inside and say, how good does this feel right now? How do I feel? How happy am I? How at ease in the body and in the mind? Connecting with that sense of pain, of suffering, and instead of focusing on the other person, turning towards oneself, connecting with that pain and suffering, and feeling it, really feeling it, knowing it as pain, knowing it as suffering, and then giving to oneself compassion. So actually not being so concerned with the other person, giving to oneself compassion because it is painful. Something potentially quite interesting can happen there. When we give compassion to ourselves, something in ourselves begins to soften, because that's an effect of compassion. It begins to soften the heart. The heart softens. And as the heart softens, the perception changes. Perception of the other person in this case. Why? Because the perceptions that we have are dependent on the state of the heart. When the heart is hard and brittle, we have a certain perception of ourselves, of the world, of others. When we're softening the heart through giving compassion to our own suffering in that moment, the heart is softened and the perception softens and the judgment softens with it. The judgment of another softens with it. So, reflecting on how little we know, remaining percipient of the beautiful, the positive qualities, giving compassion to oneself. Fourth one is a little bit kind of adapted from the teachings of Shantideva, who was a great Indian saint and mystic of, I think, the 8th century, one of the great Mahayana teachers. In this way, you find yourself judging another person, and then using the imagination a little bit, and imagining a third person who is judging you about the same thing. So, for instance, in a kind of meditation environment, we talk a lot about mindfulness, and then we might judge, oh, look how they're not quite doing it, or whatever it is. And we can imagine this third person who may be, just strolled down from his or her cave in the Himalayas, where they've been installed since they were 3 months old, practicing for 60 years, 27 hours a day, eating snow only once a week. And they come down and say, that's not mindfulness. So you're judging this person, this third person is judging you. And it's a little trick, it's a little game to use the imagination, but what can happen is one just realizes the complete futility of judging. You can always find someone who's kind of better than you at something. And just to use the mind in that way, it almost like deflates the whole structure of the judging mind. It's just futile. It's completely pointless, completely empty, really. So, reflecting what we don't know, remaining percipient of positive qualities, compassion to oneself, to soften. Imagining this third person who's judging. And the fifth one, and this sometimes takes a little bit more quiet, but maybe not. Reflecting, using the reflective mind, and say we're judging another person, realizing that in a way this person and their behavior, their speech, whatever it is that we're judging, is in a way, you could say, kind of unique expression in the universe. Just how they are. We may not like it, often we're judging it so we don't like it, but there's something kind of, again, miraculous, mysterious about just that thing manifesting. Realizing the radical diversity of life, of existence. There's unimaginable diversity of expression and uniqueness of expression. I'm reflecting, would I really want a universe my way, exactly, if I was in charge of the universe? Would that really be a good idea? And at first we can think, well, yeah, it would be. But if you actually reflect on it, something about we're living in this universe where we don't have control of all the manifestations. There's something actually more precious about that. Would I really want to run things my way? So just putting those out in a way to begin with. Ways of working, as I say, mindfulness is hugely important, and then more active ways of challenging. But there's two that I want to particularly go into, two more ways that are, in a way, that's great what I've just said, but these two are more like the kind of heavy artillery, bringing that in, which is sometimes what's needed in the case of judgment. So, the first one is the metta practice, and I'll explain what that is. And the second one is looking again at this question of self, and how I said the self gets wrapped up in the judgment. So the first one, the metta, some of you may know this word, some of you may be new. Metta is a Pali word. Pali was the language in which the Buddha's discourses were recorded. And it's M-E-T-T-A, and it usually gets translated as loving kindness, or kind of deep friendliness to all beings, including oneself. And the aspiration is a kind of unconditional friendliness, meaning it's not dependent on liking the person or them doing us a favour or them telling us we're great. It's actually unconditional. That's the aspiration. It's also boundless in the sense that it doesn't it's not limited to those we know or those we care about, friends or family. It's actually boundless. That's the aspiration. So it's quite a high aspiration. This is what we move towards developing in practice. And there are, someone was asking earlier, there are actual many techniques to develop this. And so one of the techniques is repeating phrases that embody the intention of this kind of loving kindness. So, may I be well, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may I be peaceful, etc. Whatever the phrases are. And it's important to see what's going on in this practice, where slowly and gradually, in a non-linear way, we're reconditioning the mind and the heart. Reconditioning the mind and the heart. So, as I said earlier this morning, the mind and the heart, there's a lot in there, a tremendous amount in the mind and the heart, that's about habit. And with the metta practice, developing that slowly over time, we're literally reconditioning those habits. That reconditioning is a big part of what meditation is. Okay, it's not all of it, but it's a big part of what meditation is. We're retraining, reconfiguring the habits of consciousness. And sometimes we object to that as a sort of agenda of meditation for different reasons. But just important to point out, the Buddha did really talk about that. Called the right effort means the efforts to cultivate what is beautiful, what leads to happiness, in this case loving kindness, and to let go of what doesn't, to let go of the judgment. So again, not just the mindfulness, not just noticing and kind of hoping that it will go away through mindfulness, but actually deliberately cultivating a different pattern. So this metta practice is extremely powerful over time. And it's important to see what we're doing. In a way, you could say with the metta practice, one is planting seeds of intentionality in the mind, in the heart, in the being. The way a farmer or a gardener plants seeds, and plants lots of seeds. Every time we say those, in this technique, every time we say those phrases, that seed is being planted. The seeds are being planted. And those seeds are in the ground, underneath, and then they come up, they flower, they blossom when they do. Some blossom, 5 seconds later, some 5 years later. And in a way, the farmer and the gardener have faith in nature. Put in a lot of seeds and just keep doing that. Just keep doing that. Keep feeding that intentionality, planting the seeds of intention. And over time, those intentions, they bear fruit. But we're not so in control of the time. So sometimes the metta practice, it gets looked on as a little bit of a baby practice, sort of, if you can't really handle insight meditation because you're sort of not quite together enough, just go over there, be quiet and do a little metta practice, and then maybe you can join the grown-ups. It's really not like that. It's absolutely not like that. It's, I would say, just as powerful in its transformative and liberating effects. Really, really a powerful practice. So there's the metta practice, and then there's this question of self that I talked about. And some of you were actually at the talk last night, and I went into a little bit this question of self and looking into that. So I'd actually like to pick it up again. It doesn't matter if you weren't at the talk last night. And again, say some fill this out a little bit. So earlier today, I said, when there's judgment, the self is wrapped up in that judgment. I am terrible, you are an idiot. Versus just discerning what's helpful and what's not helpful, what's leading to suffering, what's not leading to suffering. But this self being wrapped up in the way we look, it's something that's extremely deeply kind of woven into consciousness itself. At a very deep level. So right off the bat, I say, okay, I need to look into this question of self, but not at all to underestimate how deeply it is woven in. So part of being human and having a human consciousness is that looking at ourselves and others and the world in terms of self is almost natural. It's so ingrained. So we do look in terms of I am like this, I am like that, I am this kind of person, you are like this, like that. We do habitually look that way. And it's what the Buddha would say, it's actually part of the fundamental delusion. It's part of what he would call ignorance or the human condition. So not to kind of judge ourselves that judgment is coming up, because looking in terms of self is an extremely deep program. And we do this, we look in terms of self, even when the intentions, we have the best intentions and there's really a lot of integrity there and a lot of wanting to understand ourselves and interest and curiosity and eagerness to work. Even with the best intentions, we still tend to look in terms of self. So a little while ago, I was teaching somewhere and was in a small group situation. And a man was asking and describing how he felt. And he said, I'm really stuck. There's a lot of old conditioning I'm bumping up against, and I'm really stuck. I can't move through it, and I feel I'm afraid to move through it. This old conditioning, I'm stuck against it, and I'm afraid to move through it. And we had a little bit of a dialogue, and I sort of asked him, well, what's the actual experience? What's the actual experience? And he said, I'm stuck. There's old conditioning and I'm afraid to move through. And I said, what's the actual experience? And eventually he said, well, there's a kind of tightness here. There's a kind of tightness in the belly. And just encouraging, could you actually just see it as that, without this added layer, added interpretation and view, I am stuck, there is old conditioning, I am afraid to move through it. Sometimes the language of I am stuck, there is old conditioning, I am afraid to move through, that language and using those structures and that kind of way of looking is extremely helpful, can really be helpful. Sometimes it's really not helpful. There's nothing's really coming out of using that language, and much more helpful to very bare attention to the actual experience. The actual experience, the bare experience, which was just this kind of pressure and tightness here, seeing it that way, and he began to have a little more space around it, a little more ease around it. But tended to look in terms of self and the whole self story and the past of the self and the future of the self and all that whole package, and it was really just a burden and a kind of taking up a lot of space and not helpful in terms of moving through, not helpful in terms of freedom at that time. This, for those of you who were here last night, was talking about picking up certain views and using them if they're helpful, when they're helpful, and then putting them down and picking up another view when it's helpful and when it's not. So we can use that language, old conditioning, patterns, fear of moving through, I am stuck, etc. And we can put it down and use a different language. And there's a real skill and maturity in doing that, being able to do that. And I have a good friend who, similarly, she spent 7 years in India in her 20s and 30s, and almost all that time devoted to Dharma practice, devoted to meditation, either sitting meditation retreats and visiting teachers or helping out, managing retreats, but very much in that, just doing that, 7 years. And felt towards the latter part, there was some degree of freedom, nothing, she would never say anything major, but some degree of freedom, like a lot had been let go of and a lot of freedom came in. And then moved back to the West and sort of gradually discovered, there's still quite some stuff there, some stuff around anxiety around money and this aspect of life and other aspect of life. And we were talking about it in the context of quite a long conversation. She was saying, well, I just see it's where I am, it's where I am. And this is just an example of a very light way of using self, seeing in terms of self, where I am. So it's important to see what qualities are in the mind and in the heart. Is there fear or is there not fear? Is there freedom or is there not freedom? Is there openness or is there closeness? It's important to see that. Again, discerning, but how much self are we making around that? And then kind of concluding about where we are, who we are, how we are, defining ourselves based on what qualities are in the mind or heart at the time. So the Buddha talks a lot about this. He says, see, in the Pali, see dharmas in the dharmas, meaning see these qualities of heart or mind, see them as that. See dharmas as dharmas. See qualities of mind and heart as qualities of mind and heart. Do not see qualities of mind and heart as self, as how I am. Okay, so it's a subtle shift, but it's actually significant. A little while ago at Gaia House, there were 2 retreats, almost exactly reporting exactly the same things, experienced at the same time, roughly. And we're reporting, beginning to notice, because there was more mindfulness, beginning to notice all kinds of kind of not so pretty thoughts and intentions come into the mind. So I think one of them was just, they were out for a walk and they noticed this squashed animal, and there was just a sense of kind of glee And just a moment just come into the mind, sort of glee that this animal had been killed or something. And different examples of that kind of thing. And in one case, it was actually a lot of self-destructive thoughts came up, like wanting to kind of sabotage oneself in different ways. Again, though, can we just see that as a thought or an intention coming up, and not so much define ourselves around it? So in these cases, the immediate tendency was the mind to come in and say, "Oh, I'm evil," or I'm bad, there's something bad in me, or I'm a self-saboteur, or whatever it was. Immediately, the tendency is for the mind to identify with the thought, with the intention that comes out, and just take it as a definer of who we are and how we are. The more we do that, the more we kind of crystallize and contract a self-view around what comes up, the more we actually have fear of ourselves. We're actually afraid of ourselves, afraid of our past, afraid of what we might discover in there. So in this case, there was, well, what is in here? Now I'm here at the meditation retreat and I'm looking at, goodness me, do I really want to look in there? And actually, sometimes the feeling is, maybe there's an evil monster inside me. And now I'm really beginning to see. Now I see the truth about myself. If we have that kind of thought, it's going to be extremely painful, that kind of belief. It's extremely painful. Not to trust ourselves, to view ourselves with suspicion and with mistrust and with that kind of judgment. Very, very painful. Sort of an existential pain in that. And there will be fear there. We will be afraid of ourselves and afraid of what we discover within ourselves. So this is not uncommon stuff that I'm talking about. This is part of the human condition. That we often are afraid of ourselves and afraid of what might lie within us. Part of the reason that meditation is actually not that popular is a lot of people just, well, I'd rather not know, actually, kind of what's in there. The assumption is it's going to be pretty dark and not so nice, and I'll feel really bad about myself. The more we see that way, the more fear there is, and we actually give solidity to that evil monster, or whatever word you want to use, but give solidity to it by the fearing itself. The fear itself gives it a kind of reality and solidity. So we need to see that monster, even if we have a sense of a monster inside, or, I'm using that language, so please on your own. We have to see that's ephemeral. There's nothing to it. It's an illusion. You actually have to stare it in the face and look, and it's almost like the looking just goes right through it, because there's really not anything there, substantially speaking. It's an illusion. Can we begin to train ourselves to look in a different way, that thoughts and intentions that arise, in a way they just arise in the moment. So this is much easier to see when the mind is somewhat calm, but we can begin to see they just kind of arise. A thought pops out of nowhere and disappears. Or an intention, whether it's a good intention or a harmful intention, whatever, it just arises out of nowhere and disappears. And we want to train ourselves, again, and this is non-linear and it's something that happens gradually over time, train ourselves in being able to see our inner experience that way. That it's just something that's arising out of nowhere and disappearing into nowhere. And to experience that sense. Because then we're seeing it not as me, mine, not as self, but just as something that's coming and going out of nowhere. Don't need to get identified with it. So from the Dharma point of view, which means the point of view of freedom, really, the point of view of peace in life, it's actually not so important whether negative thoughts or intentions arise. That their arising is not, whether they arise or not, is not so important. But what is important is two things: the response we have to them and the view that we have about them. The response and the view. So their arising is not a problem, really not a problem. So even the arising of a thought, I want to kill this person, it's not a problem. So response and view are important. Response meaning we always we train ourselves to try to choose a response, an action that is not, murderous, not harmful, or a speech, a way of speaking that's not harmful. So the response, this thing has arisen, it's a harmful intention or a negative intention or a negative thought, whatever. What's my response? What's the action? What's the speech that comes out of it? And we choose what's not harmful. And we train ourselves to do that. That much is important. The response is important. And the other thing is the view that we have about them. So am I viewing them as self, as me, mine, and as implying that I am a bad person? Or a fantastic person? So this is the piece I talked about last night. Can we practice looking and seeing experience as not self, not me, not mine? And it's really a practice. And in a way it's counterintuitive because we think, well, who else is having a thought? It's here. I'm having a thought. But we practice looking in this way. And over time, the fear of ourselves, the fear of life just begins to subside. Because there's no basis for it anymore. Or put it this way, there's less and less basis for it. And with judging ourselves negatively, it's not so much that, we replace I am an idiot with I am brilliant and fantastic. We actually need to let go of the whole package. So for there to be real freedom, both are let go of. Any kind of judgment or assessment of oneself in that respect is let go of. It's like, some of you may know the teacher Thich Nhat Hanh has this analogy of if you don't like one end of a stick, say you don't like the left side of a stick, so we don't like the bad side of judgment, we feel the pain of that when we call ourselves idiots or stupid or unworthy or this or that. We don't like that left hand, so we chop off the left hand side of the stick. And then what have we got? We've got a shorter stick with a left and a right. And we chop off the left again, and you can see where this is going. There's no way of letting go of just one end of the self-judgment package. If we just let go of the negative, it's just a matter of time and think, well, I'll just grab hold of this I am fantastic end. I am brilliant, I am whatever. It's just a matter of time before the whole dynamic reasserts itself, because we've still got a stick in that analogy, we've still got a stick. So we're letting go as well of identification with the positive. So there's a beautiful intention, there's a beautiful thought. Can we also see that as not me, not mine? It's not, now I see, this is my true nature. In these kind of situations, we talk a lot about tremendous emphasis on mindfulness and awareness and attentiveness and being present. It can be very understandable that because we do that, we are, in a way, elevating the importance of mindfulness. And so where does the judgment go? Where does the self-judgment go? It goes around mindfulness. And so this is very common to see on longer retreats, when there's really very little happening except the encouragement to be mindful. And then we start judging ourselves around whether we're mindful or not. Because we're emphasizing it and talking about it. But in a way, mindfulness is also just a condition that's not self. It's not something that we can take to own or identify with. When the conditions are there, mindfulness is there, awareness is there, presence is there, brightness is there. When the conditions aren't there, it's not there. It's actually not saying anything about me. There's nothing for me to beat myself up about when it's not there, or to say, wow, aren't I great when it is there. It's just a condition. It's not self. So two ways of working with this business of beginning to let go of the self-identification. One way is we cultivate this sense or way of looking at it. I described it. Seeing something as just a thought. It's just a thought. It's just an impulse. It's just an intention. It's not me or mine. So one teacher has an analogy of the night sky, pitch black night sky, empty night sky, and suddenly a firework, and bright colours and amazing patterns, and it's like, wow, look at that. And this is what happens in our consciousness. There's a thought or an impulse, and we get sucked into that and go, wow. And we don't see it's just coming, it's bursting out of nowhere, and then it disappears, like the firework just fades into nowhere. So intentions, thoughts, everything that we judge ourselves by is like that. Can we begin to see our experience that way? It's just coming out of nowhere, disappearing into nowhere. And it's not me, not mine, not self. So that's the first way. The second way is rather seeing the whole web of conditions, the whole kind of array and complex patterning of conditions that come together in any moment to make that moment, to make anything that I say or do or think. So what do I mean? I mean, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation we have to present something at work, or we do, we're in a dialogue with someone and we say something and it didn't go very well. We appear stupid, or we say something stupid, or we do something stupid, or whatever it is. And this is part of being human. What tends to happen, again, we see it in terms of self. Here I am, supposed to give a Dharma talk or presentation, whatever it is, and there it was, and it really didn't go that well. And we tend to see, I'm no good at this, I'm no good. Can we see what are the conditions, inner and outer, that come together in that moment to make the expression? So maybe there was a lot of tiredness around. Maybe there was something in the environment, the other person or the people or the work environment, that was extremely pressured, or just a little bit pressured. Maybe there's agitation around. Maybe there's fear around. These are all what we call conditioning factors. So what's expressed in the moment, and sometimes even what's thought and felt in the moment, so we say, I shouldn't feel such and such emotion. All that arises because of this interplay of conditions, inner and outer. We tend to see it in terms of self. I feel angry, therefore I'm an angry person, or I shouldn't feel angry. We don't see, well, there was all these other situations. I was really tired, I was irritable, they were doing this, it was a pressured environment, etc., etc. All the conditions together make the action, the expression, the moment, the experience in the moment. We see this for ourselves, and we see it for others, and we judge others, and we don't see the conditions, again, that are coming together for them. Some of which may be visible to us, many of which aren't. But their actions, their expression, what they're going through is also coming from this interplay. Now we can hear that and we say, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Maybe it's obvious. It is, hopefully it is. But the thing is, again, the habit of human consciousness is to see in terms of self. And so we don't do that. We don't do that. All that I'm talking about is practice. We need to literally train the mind and the heart to see in different ways. So sometimes it means reflecting on, well, what were the conditions in that moment? I'm judging what I did in some moment. What were the conditions? Let me backtrack. What were the conditions that led to that? Or in another person? And really reflecting on it and training the mind to make a shift from seeing in terms of self to seeing in terms of conditions. And sometimes we can't do that on our own, and we really need a friend or someone we trust, or someone we trust their perception. We really need to ask them, can you help me? What am I not seeing here about the conditions that fed that? All I'm seeing is that I'm an idiot, I'm a schmuck. Or they're an idiot, they're a schmuck. Help me to see. And sometimes a friend can help. But to train, this is one of the most worthwhile shifts that we can train ourselves to do, to see in terms of conditions rather than in terms of self. So it may not sound like a big deal, but to train the mind that way, really, really significant. A really worth it shift. And of course, that doesn't absolve our responsibility from how we act and how we speak in the world. Of course, we still have that. So there's this two ways, as I said, seeing it as coming out of nowhere, disappearing into nowhere. Not me, not mine. Or seeing it as coming out of all the conditions that come together. Also not self, not me, not mine. And this is really a journey and a practice and a training. When the Buddha talks about the human condition, in a way one of the metaphors is that human beings have seeds in them, all different kinds of seeds, and three very powerful seeds and very deeply ingrained seeds that keep coming up are the seeds of greed, of aversion, and of delusion. And in a way, just seeing that that's the case for ourselves and others makes a huge difference. This is part of the human condition, that these impulses of greed, of aversion, of delusion just keep coming up. And so we can see, sometimes we're judging another person, we look at what they've done or what they say, and we say, I'm not like that. I never came anywhere close to doing anything like that. And it's true, probably no one in this room ever came close to murdering anyone. But we look at that, but what we can train ourselves to see is the commonality. So, okay, we didn't murder someone, we didn't whatever it was. But I too have acted out of greed, no question. I still do. I too have acted out of aversion, no question. I too act out of delusion. And going back to a more fundamental commonality and just seeing that the seeds are present, and the conditions differ around those seeds which cause a certain behavior. So this journey, in a way you could say, from judging mind to letting go of the judgment, freedom from the judging mind, it's really transforming a habit of judgment. And that happens, just from my own experience and working with others, it happens in a number of, in two obviously different ways. Some of it can happen extremely suddenly. I mean, sometimes it seems hard to believe it. Sometimes it's like those big, huge shelves of ice in the of Greenland that are just disappearing into the sea now. Just a huge chunk of this whole structure of judging can just, it's a real possibility for people practicing in the right way. That can happen. That's the power of practice. But probably more often, probably more often for people, there's a kind of gradual shift, and gradually in the life, the judging mind is just loses its power and is quietened. Sometimes in that gradual process, it goes through quite an interesting sort of intermediate phase where the habit is so strong and has been going so long that, for instance, I'm an idiot. The thought might still come up, but it's completely empty of power. It's just like empty. It's just completely floppy. It has no power, no substance to it. But because it was such a habit, it's just been going, and it's kind of running on zero fuel. It's just the momentum's keeping it going. And then after a while, even that goes. And then the thoughts just don't arise anymore. But it can, in the gradual movement of this, can reach a place where it's just going, but it's running on empty. Okay, finally, I want to touch on, I just want to look again we talked about quite a lot, place of mindfulness, different strategies, this difference between discernment and judgment, the power of metta and looking at the question of self. What else does the teachings bring to bear on this? And actually there's quite a lot. I want to pick out one more piece.
How about emotions? We've talked very little about emotions which come up as well. We talked a lot about mind and thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Everything that I said about mind and thought will go for emotions as well. Yeah. But why don't you save it for the discussion and we can talk more about thoughts more. But everything that I said goes for that too. So I want to go back to this piece about judging and discerning that I was near the beginning. Judging and discerning. I want to read you something from this really beautiful passage from the third Zen patriarch. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's quite well known. It's one of the treasures of the Dharma, I think. And it's speaking to, in a way, going beyond even discernment. Remember this distinction between discernment and judgment. Discernment being just making a discernment between what's helpful and what isn't. Speaking to going even beyond that. It says, the great way or the great truth is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. When the deep nature of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. The way, the truth, is perfect like vast space. Nothing is lacking and nothing is in excess. Indeed, it is due to our choosing to accept or reject that we do not see the true nature of things. So I always find that very beautiful. It's the beginning of quite a much longer poem. And it's if you do get chance to get hold of a copy, it's really, really, really lovely. And for me, something that one keeps rediscovering it at different sort of stages of practice and rediscovering, learning, seeing it anew each time. It's something very, very beautiful. So what's he getting at here? What's he getting at? Is it possible that we could even let go of this discernment too? Is there something with that too? And there are many ways to approach this, many angles, many possibilities. So I'm going to talk about two very kind of briefly, but one is, and it's the more popular one in practice circles, regarding everything as kind of equal from the point of view of awareness. So to say that, like that analogy of the sky and the fireworks, the sky doesn't kind of care what happens, what the fireworks look like, whether they're good fireworks or bad fireworks, whether they're ugly or pretty. From the point of view of awareness, or you could say the mirror of awareness, everything that comes in front of that mirror, it's the same to the mirror. It's the same. So cold and heat and this and that, it's the same. From the point of view of awareness, it's the same. And we can begin, again, this is a possibility of practice. We can actually start practicing, seeing things from that sort of standpoint of awareness. Not making such a distinction between this and that. And one can pick that up as a practice and take it again on a journey, and it's a tremendous amount of freedom and go through different aspects, but tremendous amount of freedom in that. Second thing is a bit more sophisticated, but to actually realize that discerning between this and that, any two things, discerning, is actually part of perception. It's part of how we perceive. So something, and not that thing, this thing and not that thing. It's part of how we perceive. We perceive pairs of things. So pleasure and pain, in Dharma terms, these distinctions that we discern between calmness and agitation. Pleasure only means something in relation to pain. Pain only means something in relation to pleasure. Calmness only in relation to agitation, and vice versa. They exist like the left and right of the stick as pairs of dualities of opposites. Stillness of mind and movement of mind, metta and non-metta, kindness and unkindness, mindfulness and distraction, clean and dirty, pure and impure, wisdom and delusion. All these are pairs of dualities that only exist kind of dependent on each other. Their very definition depends on the opposite. In a way, we say in Dharma, they're empty of inherent independent existence. They exist dependent on their opposite. So what can happen in practice, one other avenue, is that we can begin to introduce a little bit of doubt into the practice, maybe just a little bit, into the independent existence of these things, of what we're discerning. What we can see is that when we do that, put it the other way, the more we believe in something's independent existence, the more we start measuring in relation to that thing. So the more we believe in pain or pleasure as something independent in existence, as calm, with independent existence, the more we believe in calm and agitation as a real dichotomy, the more we start measuring along those lines. And that measurement is part of the process of perception, and it will actually begin to draw that duality out to perception. So then we do really notice, wow, pleasure and pain really are very different. And everything that comes with that, all the fear that comes with that, calmness and agitation really are different, and all the judgment that comes with that. Because we're believing, we start measuring without even realizing it, and that feeds the perception. We draw out the dualities to perception. So the discernment itself is actually part of the perceptual process. And things begin to stand out to perception. If we can begin to practice in a way that we begin to doubt the reality of this, we begin to see this process at work, and then reflect, well, they're not actually inherently real. They don't exist, these dualities, independent of the way I'm seeing them. When we can reflect that way as we're looking, we're taking away the belief, taking away the measurement, and taking away, in a way, what's feeding the very perception itself of all these pairs. And sometimes the perception just begins to fade. Sometimes it fades a little bit, sometimes it fades completely. And that's not to say that we would remain free of perception forever, because there's no such thing. But it's more, there's a very deep understanding there that this world of duality is not real in the way that it seems to be real. But it's okay. It's really okay. There's not a problem with it. So all of that doesn't mean that we don't still cultivate what's beautiful and make that discernment. It's just that we don't have the same kind of investment in it as something really real, and that we can build judgment or any kind of problem out of at all. So just to sum up, practice is something very, very broad, and there's so, we were saying earlier in the question period earlier, there's so many different kind of approaches and emphases that one can take in practice, and it's all great, it's all fantastic, it's all good practice. And in a way, it is this, what's important is seeing this capacity that we have to learn to pick up a certain way of working, a certain view, and put it down again, and then pick up another one and put it down again, and be really free in that choice. One of the great Zen masters, Lin Chi, someone asked him, how do you practice? And he said, sometimes I take away the person, meaning this regarding things as not me, not mine, not self, what I talked about. Sometimes I take away the person. Sometimes I take away the thing. So what I've just talked about, seeing this emptiness of duality, seeing this things aren't really real. Sometimes I take away the thing. Sometimes I take away both the person and the thing. And sometimes I leave the person and I leave the thing. Meaning, completely ordinary way you and I need to talk about this problem. Here's this very real thing, and relating to it on that level, and like the person I was talking with, the self stuck with old conditioning and the fear of moving through. That language is completely fine. But there is, in the sort of range of the Dharma, this amazing choice that we have of developing different ways of looking, different ways of moving towards freedom. And it's all beautiful, it's all valuable. Okay, so that's where I'm going to stop for now. And then, as I said, we have questions and time for discussion later. So now is a period for some walking meditation, and if you rang the bell at 20 past.